The reading today is from Proverbs chapter 3, verses 1 to 10. My son, do not forget my teaching, but keep my commands in your heart, for they will prolong your life for many years and bring you peace and prosperity. Let love and faithfulness never leave you. Bind them round your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Then you will win favour and a good name in the sight of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil. This will bring health to your body and nourishment to your bones. Honour the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and your vats will brim over with new wine.
Right, good morning everyone. Nice to see some familiar faces and friendly smiles, always very encouraging. So for those who don't know me, my name's Manny. You might have seen me working at the back of the church, mostly on the sound desk. So I'm not entirely sure why Peter's asked me to come to the front and preach today, because it's not something that I usually do. But perhaps he was trying to practice trust on me and trusting that I will be able to deliver. Although based on his lovely introduction that this is the lowest of low churches, I'm not too sure how much faith he has in me for today. But nevertheless, I have tried to prepare for this. So as you can see on the front here, I'll be talking about how love always trusts. So if you guys would like to join me in a quick prayer. So thank you today, God, for giving us this space, this safe space where we can all share our thoughts and understanding, trying to get closer to you, God, trying to understand you better, trying to trust you better. I also pray today, God, that someone in this room here today or online gets something from this sermon today, whether it be small or big, that it resonates with them and helps them to lean closer to you, God. And finally, for my sake, God, I pray that this goes well, and that I don't embarrass myself and I can come to this church again. Amen. So there we are. So on this slide now, you can see that I've got 4 pictures up on either side here. I haven't dropped the ball already. Believe it or not, these all are everyday representations of trust that we put in man-made objects here. So the first picture, I don't know if you guys can see very clearly, but basically it's Steph all suited and booted in a life jacket. This was just before we were going on a sea safari trip around Cornwall. And she had entrusted that in the worst case scenario, if she were to fall out of the boat, that the life jacket would save her and it would inflate, and she trusted that it would keep her afloat on deep waters. Second picture here is less interesting. It's of me in my old work, where I worked for about 2 years. It's me at my desk. And I actually worked out that I sat on that chair about 5,500 times over the course of the 2 years, and not once did I question whether the chair would cave in beneath me. I just trusted that it would take my weight, even though I was having lots and lots of ice buns there. I never questioned it. So the third picture that we have here, it's of the day that me and Steph drove our car back from the dealership. I don't know anything about cars. Anyone that knows me, I work in a hospital, but I had trusted that this car would take me around my 80-mile trip from Surrey to Worthing Hospital every day with no issues, and I'd get there safely. Final picture, more recently, it's some of you guys might know. Me and Steph recently bought a house. It's a massive doer-upper, and there I am on the top of a ladder trying to put some plasterboards in, looking all professional. And I trusted that this ladder would keep my weight and it would be safe, it would be sturdy, it would not wobble. And it did so, but I'm not too sure from that picture whether Steph's dad, Robin, trusted me in the job that he had asked me to do. So all of this, what I'm trying to get at is that we readily will trust in man-made objects, no questions about it. We don't wake up in the middle of the night and think, oh gosh, is that ladder going to support me the next day? And I suppose the reason being is, why do we trust in these objects? Is it because we know it's a good brand? Because we know that the people who work for these companies have the qualifications, they've got the experience in making these objects? And perhaps that's what's built our trust around these objects, and that's why we can do so readily without a second thought. But my question now is, why do we struggle to trust in God? Because we know from readings and songs in the Bible that he is the most qualified creator of them all. So he's the most qualified creator of them all. And John chapter 4 verse 16 says how God is love. And in this series we learn that we can replace the word love with God. So we know God is kind, he does not envy, he does not boast, he's not easily angered. He doesn't keep any records of our wrongs, and he always protects and preserves. Those are all trusting characteristics of God. And the Bible doesn't just tell us why we should trust God because he's got all of these wonderful characteristics. There's many stories in there that show us how trusting in him helps us get the best out of each other. So on the next slide, here I'll be talking a little bit more about the story of manna. So for those who don't know, the Israelites were fleeing Egypt, a place where they were being persecuted, made to work as slaves. And as part of trying to get away from Egypt, they had to cross a desert. And it was a long trek, and along that way they started to realise we're running out of food here, and we're running out of food quick. So much to the point that they had actually wished to return back to Egypt, the place that they were being persecuted, because it was so rough, it was so dire out there. They wanted to turn back. However, God had heard their concerns, they heard his worries, and the next morning the Israelites woke up, they left their tents, and they found that grains had fallen all over the deserts, and that this could be collected, milled, and turned into bread to feed them so that they could eventually reach the promised land. So, it wasn't all that easy, of course. Moses, along the way, had said to the Israelites, only take what you need. Do not collect in excess. God will continue to provide for us every day. However, being in that situation where you're so near to starvation, the situation is so dire, you can understand how the Israelites wanted to take matters into their own hands. We've got this grain that's falling in, so we're going to collect more. And we're going to hoard it because the next day it might not come again. And as they did that, they found that the excess grain that they had collected would rot in their tents, and on other days there would be absolutely no grain fall at all. Now, this wasn't God trying to persecute them because they weren't listening to him, but perhaps what the Israelites were doing when they weren't trusting in God was making it more challenging for God to fulfill his promises from his end. So, from that reading, we know that the Israelites, they eventually learned that, yes, God will continue to provide every day, and by trusting in him, although we don't understand how he works or the way he works, we have multiple accounts of him being a good character and keeping to his promise and keeping those who follow him and follow his instructions safe. But we can't do that with people. People are complicated. We're not like objects. We can't be vetted. We don't come with 5-star reviews. We don't have a manual book of our pros and cons, our shortfalls, our imperfections. If we did today, imagine if before this sermon you could go on the internet, look up, is Manny a good public speaker? I'm sure many of you guys wouldn't be sat here today and would have given this Sunday a miss. So I'm, for one, I'm thankful that that's not in place. So how do we trust in God and trust in other people, God's creations, if we don't have this manual? So what I would say in this situation would be perhaps we need to turn to God and ask God to help discern with us about who is a trusting character. So by this it could be, say, an example of if we were to tell a secret, there's person A who's got godlike characteristics, so they are kind, they're patient, they're empathetic, they're understanding, and they're selfless, versus person B who perhaps has said a few unkind things, does boast, isn't encouraging, isn't empathetic. It sounds pretty obvious from that point who we would trust and who we wouldn't. So now I've got a bit of a story of my own as well to share about how. Oh, sorry, I think we missed the slides there. No, okay. Okay. Well. We'll go back to what I was going to say. So from the main reading, I was going to touch on a smaller section of that. So trusting in the Lord with all your heart, leaning not on your own understanding, and in your ways submit to him. He will make your path straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil. So leaning not on your own understanding and not being wise in our own eyes. What does that mean? First part is quite self-explanatory. Second part, so not being wise in your own eyes, my interpretation of that is that we simply do not assume that we have all the answers to our situations. So in this situation, the Israelites, their understanding was, if we don't have food, we're not going to make it to the promised land, and we're going to have to return to Egypt where we're being persecuted. Their own answer was hoarding food and gathering and collecting. However, because they were doing those two actions, God wasn't able to make their path straight for them, and it made it more challenging than perhaps what it needed to be. So what I was going to say was my own story of this happened last weekend. So I had a couple of parcels to pick up from town. I decided to jump on my bike, and I was along the seafront there, having a really great time, love cycling, love my life. And then as I was passing by, there was another cyclist who went past me and was actually catcalling me. So immediately that sort of put a big dampener on my day. I went into town, tried to sort of forget about it, picked up the things that I needed to pick up, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to try and turn this day around. I'm going to enjoy the weather, it's a nice day, I'm already out on my bike, I'm just going to make an extra long ride of it, go up and down the seafront, and try and forget the interaction that I had earlier. So on the way back, when I was cycling, there was another strange interaction that I had. There was now this man calling out at me, who I've never seen before, basically jumping in front of my bike, telling me to stop, wait. And I was already freaked out. I had one interaction earlier on that day. I was like, I'm not going to entertain this. Ordinarily, I probably would have stopped, because clearly that's not someone catcalling me. They're quite distressed. They want me to stop for one reason or another. But I had let that first interaction dictate how I would interact with everyone else, no matter what they were saying to me. So I carried on. I cycled home. I told Steph about the weird accounts from that cycle ride. She tells me, oh, maybe you dropped something, maybe that's why he was trying to get your attention. I said to her, no way. Anyone who knows me knows that I never lose anything. My room could be a mess, but everything has a specific place and location, and I can tell you where things are. So I go back through the front door, do the usual things, take my keys out of my pocket, my phone out of my pocket, and then I'm doing that little panic, that little dance when you're checking all your pockets, and my purse was gone. So I ran back out the front door. I told Steph, oh, my purse has gone missing. I think that's why that man was trying to to stop me. And then at this point, Steph, I think all empathy had flown out the door for her. She was like, well, why didn't you stop then if a stranger's shouting at you? You should have just jumped off your bike. So I was basically sulking. I was panicking. I was sort of thinking, gosh, like, I'm never going to see my purse back. It has my ID, it has Steph's ID in it for some reason. And this was the very end of it. Now, thankfully, later on down the line, because it had my driving license in and my ID, this man did come back. He knocked on the door and he presented me back with my purse. I explained to him, sorry that I didn't stop. It's quite uncharacteristic of me, but there was an unpleasant interaction that I had earlier, and I shouldn't have let that impact how I dealt with him when he was trying to do something kind back to me. So I suppose how that links to the main reason that we were talking about today is, from my understanding of that situation, I'd been heckled, I didn't want to stop with anyone. My own advice to myself was to go into self-preservation mode. I didn't want to entertain it, I didn't want any of the conflict, so I'm just going to cycle past any stranger that there is that day. But by doing so, I prevented this man from doing the kind thing, the selfless thing of returning my purse back to me. And if I had seen past my own judgment and trusted in God and trusted in his creations, it might have, meant that I didn't have that 2-hour episode of panic, anxiety, and Steph's smug comments about me losing my purse. So that's something that I took away from that moment. And it's not to say with trust that we should necessarily just trust everyone and anything. I think it's a really delicate balance between realism and vulnerability. So of course, if your trust has been broken and manipulated, I'm not telling you to always try and extend that olive branch out, because it can be damaging. But in that situation, it's being realistic and perhaps placing the trust back on yourself. It's trusting yourself to draw that line in that relationship and put up firm boundaries. Know that your decision, and trust in your decision to be the correct decision and the most loving way of moving forward with that person is perhaps going separate ways in that instance. So what I really want to hone in on is that it's not necessarily always being vulnerable when the situation is abusive and manipulative. It's okay to also walk away from that moment and trust in your own actions that you have done the best thing for yourself and for the other person in that situation. So I suppose my take-home points are today is trust in God. We can only see things through one lens, through one direction, and sometimes that can cloud our judgment and affect the ability for us to trust in others, and for others to then do good deeds and demonstrate trust in you. So trust in God. He knows what's going on. He's got the grand plan up there. We don't. Sounds easier. It's easy to say that up here, but of course it's something that we need to continually practice as well. And last point would be to trust yourself to discern with God whether to trust someone or not. So, like I mentioned earlier, is looking out for those godly characteristics in people, whether they're kind, selfless, empathetic, patient, all those sorts of things. And hopefully that will help you guys and myself to start trusting new people that come into our lives. That's about it, really. I think that's all I've got to say. But yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk up here, Peter, and I hope that from my short sermon today, someone's managed to take something away about how love always trusts and how to trust in God.
Thank you so much, Manny. And we're going to sing